Our next speaker is Sebastian Ungureanu, Senior Product Marketing Manager at UiPath. A combination of marketer and technologist, Sebastian has 9+ years of experience working in cybersecurity, big data, and cloud. As a part of a product marketing team at UiPath, he is responsible for orchestrator, automation ops, and security throughout the entire company portfolio. And Sebastian will show us how UiPath developed tools and frameworks to set up separation of duties, change control, governance, and secure automation development lifecycles. Welcome, Sebastian. The stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. What it doesn't say there, it's that 7 years ago, I was on the other side of Big Data Week, working with the organizing team to do the London 2015 event. So it's a great pleasure to be here on the stage today. So I see a lot of people frowning. Let's defrown and make a joke about automation and data science. Do you all know why the robot crossed the road? It just made a data-driven decision. Okay, I hope that makes it easier to go through the, I'm sorry, this isn't changing the slides. Well, guys in the back, can we get some help to change the slides? Anyway, let me start by first saying that any forward-looking statements made today, okay, thank you so much, do not fully represent the future, so there's always a certain degree of uncertainty when speaking about the future. So to get an understanding of where we're coming from at UiPath, which is software automation company, is by looking at what happened to productivity along the years. So there were a couple of big events in the history of productivity that made it go up in terms of index labor output, one of which is the launch of Amazon Web Services in 2006. It's part of what has driven the advent of data science and big data, partially. If we look at productivity today, we're seeing kind of a slump. And one of the reasons why that is because today there's a lot of technology fragmentation in the technology world. The average large organization is using more than 175 enterprise applications, all of which are generating large amounts of data, which needs to be stored, processed, and made sense of at a later point. And this is a big issue because it leads to the so-called linkage burden of connecting all the data from all these separate systems. And people carry much of this burden, right? It frustrates them. It's pretty inefficient for the enterprise. So tasks such as inputting data, transferring data, processing, analyzing, reconciling data points, all of these are tasks which automation can help with. So there is sort of a natural connection between automation and big data. So you have data in, data out, and in between, you can use automation to process it more efficiently than before. So by using RPA together with AI and machine learning skills, you can, for example, take complex data from multiple systems and process it programmatically, automatically, and relieve some of the burden on data engineers, data scientists, and distribute the work better among them. With regards to inputting data, for example, we are already integrated with a couple hundred systems, but more recently, we've launched something called Connector Builder, which is essentially a way to take any API, so public or private internal API, and connect to it using our products. And so, for example, you could connect to any enterprise application that processes data, stores data, just by taking their API and integrating it. On average, there's more than 6 work weeks per year, which could be which could be cut from the work by using automation. So what happens once you start using these solutions, which do not require as much programming or as much knowledge about data processing, about development, programming, so on and so forth, is that you end up democratizing the environment. What this means is that you give birth to a new category of programmers or data users, which are not as skilled as traditional programmers and do not necessarily know how to use data the right way, do not know all the things that Tudor talked about, for example, and essentially should not be burdened with learning everything about data all the time, although this is the ideal situation. So then you sort of need some guardrails, some frameworks, some recommendations for them. So you might be experiencing a similar phenomenon already if you're using such tools, in which more and more users are getting access to important data, critical data, and processing it in one way or another. So the difference between what we call a citizen developer and a professional developer is, in terms of characteristics, a citizen developer has less programming skills, uses low-code or no-code applications to do data tasks. They develop for self-usage mostly, but they can use personal customer data in doing so, for example. They do low complexity and low to medium risk tasks typically, and they work in business or operational functions. As opposed to a professional developer, which is, well, a full-time professional who develops for himself or for the company or a certain group within the company. They do high complexity data tasks with medium to high, which pose medium to high risk. And they work in R&D or engineering typically. As far as infrastructure goes, while citizen developers use their own machines typically, but they connect to enterprise systems. They pull data from those systems. And they use their own credentials for doing so. So, for example, if they become compromised, this becomes an issue for the company, and it could lead to a compromise of data, unless you have the right processes and tools in place. Whereas a professional developer, the workflow is the typical one. They use a local machine of VM, or they spin up something in the cloud, so on and so forth. They are better at handling credentials. They are able to use their SSO, or separate company or service accounts and other assets like that. Okay, and the approach we've taken, and I want to go through it real quick here because you might learn something from it or try to replicate it, is that we put trust at the core of automation, and we do so by implementing 3 fundamental principles. Number 1, security has to run end-to-end. So there should not be any component of your tech stack that is less secure. It could lead to compromise across different systems. Okay, so our tools are built from one end to the other with the idea that there needs to be a coherent idea behind security. Number 2, we are transparent with our controls and processes. We communicate quite openly with our customers and partners about the security controls that we have in place. And number 3 is, well, we rely on our largest customers to talk to them, to understand their data security, compliance, and governance needs, and try to implement them. And I recommend doing the same thing whenever you are processing large amounts of data. try to understand where it's coming from, how your partners are using it, what's happening within your company, and then where you're forwarding the data. Okay, and I'm going to go really quick through this slide. We connect processes to people through three main directives, let's call them, which is discovering the opportunity to automate more, use more data to process increasingly complex tasks. Automate, you can get more done by employing a digital workforce along your traditional human workforce, and then operating at enterprise grade and high scale. And let's talk a minute about the first principle, which is securing automation from one end to the other. It all starts with authentication. Okay, so we've built a custom identification service, which requires single sign-on with a bunch of privileges attached to it to be able to access our entire ecosystem. Likewise, whenever possible, I encourage you to use an identity service to provide access to developers or data engineers into your systems. Then whenever processing data with robots, we employ an EDR solution from CrowdStrike. We have a technology alliance with them. And then there are a number of solutions that are useful for governance and compliance and securing data. And some of the things we've invested in, and these are really things that you could find with other vendors, not only in automation, or you could implement them yourself in your companies, is number one, we've invested in something called automation pipelines. It's a way to connect to GitHub account and do CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and source control. Robot endpoint protection is what I've been telling you about with CrowdStrike. It's an EDR solution to scan whenever there's indicators of compromise when a task is being run. Full data sovereignty, it's something Tudor touched upon in his previous presentation. We offer within our cloud solutions the option for our customers to base their data locally in the countries where they want it to be stored, which have laws that govern data in a way that they're expecting or they're used to. Then we implement IP range restrictions. So, for example, you can't have people from outside the organization or from outside a department access business critical processes or automations in our case. Customer managed keys, likewise, Tudor already recommended this. So you can have your own encryption keys to encrypt your data, and remember, don't decrypt your data before transferring it. It's encryption at rest and encryption in transit are two separate things. And then finally, we implement a role-based access control to all our systems and tools. So we employ the principles of least privilege and privilege access exceptions. Okay, and let's talk a bit about what tools and products or components we use from one end to the other. So first of all, it's the identity service I already talked about. It serves as a secure centralized authentication solution. Then we use something called orchestrator, which is really what the name implies, an orchestration layer across the entire automation workflow. It provides a centralized way to manage RPA deployments and also to do governance enterprise-wide, so that the IT or security departments can deploy rules to how automation is run. And then on the governance layer, we employ an inheritance model starting from file-based policies. It's really easier for us to do this because we offer a work environment for developers, so we can enforce file-based policies. But going above that, sort of like what happens in DevOps, we offer a solution called Automation Ops, which is provides guardrails for less experienced developers, not necessarily just citizen developers, but also beginning RPA and professional developers, which we'll talk a bit about soon. Then Insights is our solution to see what data is being generated by automations, and also to audit the execution logs easily. When integrating with third-party solutions, we do penetration testing. We have a couple of certification tiers. Whenever you're using third-party providers, I encourage you to always use or request pen test. In terms of technology alliances, besides the robot endpoint protection partnership with CrowdStrike, we implement credential stores. We believe in the usage of credential stores, such as BeyondTrust, CyberArk, HashiCorp, or Thycotic. So these all integrate into what we call the automation security software development lifecycle. It's a long name, but what it is basically is a set of steps that we employ whenever there's a new automation that we deploy. So automation ops is the first step. What you do is essentially take policy and enforce it across the entire organization. So you could have, for example, rules such as don't allow access to these systems, to this category of users, or don't expose data, don't write to these other systems, for example. Malware scanning, we do this for all third-party components running on our machines. The workflow analyzer is basically a tool for developers to see if the policies are respected at design time and the runtime. And then we do peer code review. As much as you'd like to, you'll never get rid of peer code review, and automation is no exception. And then we have built-in integration of CI/CD for separation of powers in our orchestration layer. So let's look at some of the best practices that we've learned along the years or working with customers and partners. Number one, it's a good idea to uniquely name your processes, your initiatives, your queries, or whatever for easier identification. Okay, so even if it's something that's you might think will run across the entire organization, you would ideally want to give it a unique name to see where it originated, when, what it's used for, and so on and so forth. Why? Because it's also a good idea to group processes by the business area or the job function that they're used in. So, for example, if you have if you're processing data for finance, you would ideally want these processes to have a different name and have access limited to the respective departments. Okay, so it's for easier identification. Role-based access to running processes across systems is also necessary to make sure that, for example, HR does not have access to legal data, or people who shouldn't have business meddling in certain data sets do not actually get access to those data sets. And then don't forget to connect your logs to your CM solutions. So security or IT departments will always want to see the logs, to have access to the logs, even if they're not going to use them. They will want to know when data has been processed, where, in which systems, which were the results, are there any exceptions, are there any processes that are taking longer than expected, because these could all be indicators of compromise in the end. Okay. Some best practices regarding credentials. Tudor already mentioned he would like to see passwords die. Well, maybe not soon enough, but I encourage you to use credential store and increase your password length and complexity by doing so. So, for example, if you and me were to use a 100 long character password and change it every couple of days or weeks, we'd probably go insane. Well, not so for robots or automated processes. Okay, you can consider using a privileged access manager or vault to simplify password management, and also decide which systems can and should use single sign-on, ideally with MFA. And think about these two principles: the least privilege principle, which gives the least amount of access to people in need, or the privileged session management for exceptions and handling those sessions that are necessary for limited periods of time where extraordinary access to data systems. Okay. A very useful solution, and one you could probably find in a number of other domains, but specific to automation, is automation ops, which is a way to enforce a number of rules to developers who are using automation to do stuff around the company. So you could have rules based on, for example, caching data, or using some variables in their automations. You can not allow the execution of such programs or automations, in this case, if the rules are not respected. So this is the easiest way to apply policy and governance company-wide, but you can also use a subset or deploy to individual machines these rules. Okay, and the model that we're using is that of preventative governance. So we have at the organization level the automation ops solutions, and then going down to group and user level, we're able to, very much like DevOps, to turn on and off certain policies for users. And so policy is inherited, okay, and it can be fitted to every department within the company. Okay, so talking about controlling data flows. Tudor made some good points. We also do not want customer data, just to simplify the way things are processed, and we support air-gapped deployments because of that. So ideally, customers would only use automation to process data and not store it with us, although we offer those options as well. When you use logs, for example, because one of the recommendations earlier was to connect your logs to your CM systems, try to use logging solutions where variables can be excluded, so as not to store personal information, for example, within a log and transform it into a private, personal data set. Okay, our robots do not cache data locally because that can be prone to exfiltration, and we prefer to store information in RAM. And we review processes for where data is moved. And this is really something you can do in your own workflows. always when you build a new process that concerns data, review where data is being taken from and where it is being moved, because you could be moving it unknowingly to providers which are not as secure as you'd like. For example, the Yango example was really good. Regarding separation of duties, I think time is running short. Developers, especially professional developers as compared to citizen developers, need their own space. We offer, for example, separation between folders where automations are being stored, or tenant level, or at the entire company. Production, needless to say, should be separate from development, so where citizen developers should not have access. You might have different change controls, which include different sign-offs from multiple stakeholders, but for example, we include sign-off from the COE, which is the Center of Excellence, which handles automations company-wide and other stakeholder checks. And finally, 3 tips regarding governance on the longer term. We encourage customers to review their accounts grouped by function every 6 months. So whenever you have processes for handling data, try to review them at least twice a year to see if they are still needed and whether they are just using resources or generating new data without the need for them to do so anymore. Annually update or review your business policies as the business evolves, and also review the risks and the options you have, maybe switch vendors or mitigate in some new way. Okay, so I think we still have time for a couple of questions.
Do you have questions?
It's fine if you don't.
If not, I had one.
If you do,
prepared
okay,
it, but
that's great.
Let's see. Okay, so I get to go first. In setting up this very, let's say, flexible and performant development process, what would be the first security risk that you try to mitigate?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or actually the most impactful one?
So, the short answer is data loss or data exfiltration, but the long answer is you cannot look at things separately. So our mindset is that you need to do security from one end to the other. From the moment you take data, the way you connect to those systems, is it a secure connection between you as the processing layer and the storage or the place where data is being stored? Where are you storing data during processing? What are you doing with it? Is it possible for data to linger in some systems and be used mistakenly at some other point? And finally, how do you get rid of unnecessary data at the end of the processing? So, yeah, I think that's the long answer.
All would be the right one, but if you'd have like the golden fish and you could only pick one?
Well, there's no easy answer to that, actually. Do everything. The golden fish is really do the extra effort and think about all the systems that.
The reason why I'm asking is that usually we live in a world where nothing is ideal, right? And you always have to make concessions and cut from here and there. So ideally, yeah, you'd like an end-to-end secure environment, but when you can't have that.
Yeah, that's why we encourage people to look at their vendors and what they're picking before they start using it. Are they concerned at all about everything from one end to the other, or are they cutting corners and just taking the solution to market?
Great, thank you. Do you have any more questions for Sebastian? And if not, with this talk, thanks Sebastian for your talk.
Thank you.
It was a great talk. With